Rachel, you ready back there?
Yeah.
You started it yet?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, the story that I'm about to tell you is particularly haunting for one reason. And the first reason is because this story is completely true. The story was told to me by my late uncle, meaning that he's not with us anymore. My uncle told me about this story when I was about your age, 13 or 14. And he's involved in the story because it happened to him. Now, the story starts off, and it takes place shortly after the Civil War, in the late 1870s. And in the town is Dahlonega, Georgia, up there in the North Georgia mountains. What did I say at the very beginning? Stop interrupting me. Now, at that time, Dahlonega had had a gold rush, and many people in the town made a lot of money off of the gold rush. One family in particular was this family called the Darby family. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Darby had one son. He was an only child, and his name was John Darby. And John was about 21 or 22 in the late 1870s, and he was getting of that age to be married or to be wed to a suitable person in the town. So Mr. and Mrs. Darby had all of these extravagant, elaborate parties within the town to find John a wife. Well, every time they had a party, John just refuted all of the suitors. He didn't want to have anything to do with these women. He thought that they were pretentious and presumptuous, and he didn't want to have anything to do with them. So Mr. and Mrs. Darby were at a loss. Well, one day, John was riding his horse, and he was going into the town of Dahlonega, and he took a different way around. And he went across this very, very poor farm. And out there, working in the fields, picking crops, was a beautiful farm girl with long, dark, black hair and beautiful, crystal blue eyes. And as John was passing, the farm girl looked up, and their eyes met, and it was like love at first sight. He instantly fell in love. Well, John went back to his parents and he said, listen, I found the girl that I want to marry. It's this poor farm girl, and I don't care if she's not a member of the aristocracy. I don't care if she's not rich. I want to marry her. Well, back in the 1870s, very, very rich people did not marry very, very poor people. So Mr. and Mrs. Darby said, absolutely not. We want you to have nothing to do with this girl. We forbid you to see her. And so John gave them an ultimatum. And he said, either you can gain a daughter or you can lose a son. So Mr. and Mrs. Darby thought about it, and they said, rather than risk losing their one and only son, they agreed to let John marry this poor farm girl. Well, the poor farm girl's name happened to be Elizabeth. And John and Elizabeth started dating, and eventually they decided that they wanted to get married. So on the day of their wedding, John and Elizabeth Darby have this extravagant, huge wedding. Cost thousands and thousands of dollars, which back in the 1870s was a lot of money. And all of the people in Dahlonega came out to see the wedding. Well, the end of the wedding ceremony, Mr. and Mrs. Darby said that they had a surprise for John and Elizabeth. They had built them this huge mansion on top of the family's property on Darby Lane. And they called it the Darby House. So the Darby House was this massive, huge manor that was built at the very top of this hill on Darby Lane. And that was going to be their wedding present, this brand new mansion. So John and Elizabeth, excited to start their new lives, they realized that the surprise was also to have the reception at the Darby House. So all of the guests were coming from the wedding to come over for the reception after the wedding. And so they went to the Darby House and they walked in, and it was this beautiful, extravagant mansion that had butlers and maids, and it was fully staffed with a whole bunch of service people, gardeners, and all that kinds of stuff. And so when they go inside, John tells Elizabeth, go upstairs, go to our master bedroom, start getting ready so that we can prepare to meet our guests in a little bit. So Elizabeth goes upstairs to the master bedroom at the top of the stairs, and John, goes with his groomsmen. They're sitting in the parlor, and they're drinking brandy, and they're smoking cigars. And all of a sudden, they hear a blood-curdling scream come from upstairs. So John and the groomsmen run up there, and they see the maid sitting there on the floor, bawling, crying. And they walk into the master bedroom, and there's Elizabeth in her wedding dress, lying on the ground, dead, with a rope tied around her neck. She had been strangled to death. Well, John was stricken with grief, and they questioned all the people in the house. Nobody saw anything. Nobody would admit to anything. And the police investigated, and the mystery went unsolved. They never were able to find the murderer of the person that murdered Elizabeth Darby. So 2 days after the incident, John was so stricken with grief that he went into the woods, and he hung himself, and he killed himself. So in a matter of 2 days, the Darby family had lost their son and their daughter-in-law. Well, the Darby house was put up for auction and eventually sold. And over the years, people would move in, but they never stayed very long. They would only stay for maybe like a week, a month at a time, and they always left. And it became urban legend within the city of Dahlonega that the Darby house was haunted by the ghost of Elizabeth Darby, who had been murdered there on the day of her wedding. So into the 1920s, they tried to install modern electricity. The electricity didn't work. They couldn't get anything to work within the house. People would say on full moons that they would see weird stuff happening in the house, lights going on, noises being made, all this kind of stuff. And so no one would go near the house. Well, fast forward into the 1970s. This is how my family gets involved. My uncle, who was a real estate developer at that time, traveled up to North Georgia to go buy some property. And he goes to this leasing office in downtown Dahlonega, and he's flipping through properties, not seeing really anything that he likes or anything that he enjoys. And all of a sudden, he comes to the page of the Darby house. And it's listed really, really, really cheaply. Very, very, very cheaply. I'm in the middle of a story.
Okay, I need a book bag though.
Oh, okay.
So, I need Galen's book bag.
I don't know what it looks like.
Does anybody know which one? Because I have that. Oh. Excuse me.
Yeah, I don't know what it looks like.
I think it's over there somewhere.
Did he tell you what it looks like?
No, he did not.
It's right there.
Which one is it?
Thank you.
Okay, so my uncle's looking through the properties and he sees the old Darby house, and it's listed like dirt cheap, very, very, very cheaply. And my uncle thought, cha-ching, I can flip this house and make a ton of money. So he starts to ask the guy, why is this giant house listed so cheaply? Well, the real estate officer in the town tells him the story about the Darby murder, about Elizabeth Darby getting murdered there on the day of their wedding. My uncle was very skeptical. He's like, psh, I don't believe in ghosts. That's ridiculous. He goes, I want to buy this house. And the real estate officer says, listen, weird stuff happens there. Why don't you go check it out, and if you still want to buy it from me tomorrow, we'll start to talk prices. So my uncle rolls his eyes and he says, fine. He gets in his car and he starts to drive, goes way up into the mountains in Dahlonega. He drives up on this road that leads up to the house on Darby Lane, the Darby Manor house. As he starts to get up there, he sees this beautiful, constructed mansion. He gets out of his car and he takes the key, he walks up the steps, opens the door, goes inside, and he notices that the entire house is completely ransacked, completely dilapidated. It has vandalism stuff, druggies and hippies have been in there throughout the years and used the place and completely ruined it. And he's looking around and he says, other than it being in really poor shape, it looks pretty nice. So he goes upstairs, he's checking all the rooms, and he goes to the very end of the hallway, to the last door on the right, the very end, the master bedroom. And he tries to put the key in there, and the door won't open. This is the only door in the house that he can't get in, that he can't get through. So he's trying all these other keys, the door won't open. So maybe it's been rusted shut, that's why I can't get in there. So he ignores it, he goes back to the real estate guy, and says, listen, I've checked out the house, there's no ghosts, there's no ghouls, there's no goblins, it's fine, I want to start to make an offer on this house. And the leasing officer says, listen, the weirdest stuff happens there on the nights of full moons. Tonight's the start of a full moon. Why don't you go back there tonight, spend the night, and if you really want to buy it in the morning, we can start to talk about prices. So my uncle says, fine, I'll go there on the full moon, I'll spend the night in the haunted house and show you that there's nothing wrong. So the sun starts to go down, my uncle gets in his car, he drives back towards the Darby house, the sun's going down, it's getting darker and darker and darker, and he gets to the Darby house just at the break of night. He goes up there and he unlocks the door. He opens the door and he heads on inside, and he's starting to set up his cot so he can sleep there for the night. All of a sudden, he starts to hear music coming from somewhere in the house. It's an old, archaic type of tune, and he can't figure out where the music is coming from. So he starts to walk through, he goes to the kitchen, he goes to the parlor, he doesn't see anything, he doesn't hear anything, and he realizes that the sound is coming from upstairs. So he starts to walk up the stairs, very, very quietly, and he notices the sound's getting louder and louder and louder. And as he gets up to the top of the stairs, he sees at the very end of the hallway, there's just a little slimmer of light coming from the last door on the right. The same door that he couldn't open the night before. And as he walks, he notices that the sounds are getting louder and louder and louder. And he goes to the door at the very end of the hallway, and he notices right there to the right that the door is open just a little bit, just so light can get right over through a small crack in the door. He pushes the door open, and he sees a room that is elaborately and intricately decorated. Everything is polished, the bed is made, there's no dust anywhere. It looks as if somebody has been living there all along. My uncle sees a music box on this dresser that's open and it's playing music, and he goes and he shuts the music box. Well, the exact moment that he shuts the music box, he sees a light off in the distance that's blinking, and it's getting closer and closer and closer to the window. And my uncle realizes that before too long, this light is going to be in the room. And so quick thinking, he goes right over and he opens the door and he goes inside of the closet and he opens it just a little bit just so he can see right outside and see what's coming in through the door. And all of a sudden, this light comes into the room and evaporates into the figure of a woman in a white wedding dress with long, dark, black hair. And the woman glides on over to the dresser and she sits down and she starts to stroke her long, dark hair with a brush. My uncle notices that there's no reflection in the mirror at all. So, thinking that this probably is the ghost of Elizabeth Darby, he opens the door and he starts to walk out and he approaches the woman and he says, "Excuse me, are you Elizabeth Darby?" And the girl turns to him like this. And instead of those crystal blue eyes, she's got big black holes in her face. And all around, there's cracked blood, and blood is seeping out of the sockets. And he notices that around her neck is an indentation that's purple from where the rope had been that strangled her. And he goes, "Ma'am, are you Miss Elizabeth Darby?" And she stops stroking her hair and she looks at him and she goes, And so, hoping to solve the mystery, hoping to solve it, he starts to think about all of the people that might have killed her. So maybe he could solve the mystery and basically make the soul of her at rest. And so he starts to think about the story. He said, who would have wanted to kill her? And so he starts to think about the service people. He goes, maybe it was the maid. Maybe the maid was the one that killed her. So he goes, was it the maid? Was the maid the one that killed you the night of your wedding? And she stops stroking her long dark hair and she looks at him and she goes, "No!" And so he's thinking, okay, well, who else could have been? Maybe it was the butler. Maybe the butler was the one that murdered her. And my uncle goes, was it the butler? Was the butler the one that murdered you the night of your wedding? And she stops stroking her long dark hair and she looks at him and she goes, "No!" He said, maybe it was the father-in-law. The father-in-law hated her. The father-in-law hated her from the get-go. So he said, maybe it was the father-in-law. Was the father-in-law? Was he the one that murdered you at the night of your wedding? And she stops stroking her long dark hair and she looks at him and she goes, "Yes!"